Maria wiped her hands on her apron and took a deep breath as she looked around the small diner. The morning rush was almost over, but there was still a faint smell of fried eggs and coffee lingering in the air. The diner wasn't fancy, just a small place on the corner of Main Street with a few checkered tablecloths and a few worn-out booths, but it had a charm that made people keep coming back. For Maria, it wasn't about charm. It was about survival. She had been working here for nearly 3 years, ever since she turned 18. Every day, she balanced long shifts with her responsibilities at home. Her apartment was small and cramped, and it shared a wall with the neighbor's laundry room, so there was rarely a moment of quiet. Her younger brother, Alex, was only 10, and her parents were long gone. She had learned early that life didn't wait for anyone, and no one was coming to rescue her. Maria had a soft spot for people, especially kids, even though she sometimes wished she could shield herself from the world's problems. She knew what it felt like to go hungry, to worry about bills, and to feel invisible in a busy, uncaring world. Sometimes, while serving coffee and burgers, she would notice the sad eyes of a child staring at the menu board, hoping for something they couldn't have. It tugged at her heart, and she often found herself slipping extra food or a little dessert onto their table when no one was looking. Her co-workers had noticed her generosity. "You're too kind for this world, Maria," her friend and fellow waitress, Lisa, would say. "One day, someone might take advantage of that." Maria would just smile and shake her head. "I can't help it," she would reply. "If I can make someone's day better, why wouldn't I?" Money was always tight. Maria's paycheck barely covered the rent and utilities, let alone groceries or school supplies for Alex. Sometimes, she would skip meals herself, making sure Alex had breakfast and lunch packed for school. She didn't mind, it had become second nature to her, to put others first. But it wasn't easy. Many nights, she would lie in bed, listening to the hum of the radiator, wondering if she was doing enough, if she would ever get a break, or if life would always be a series of struggles. Despite the hardships, Maria never complained. She had dreams, of course small dreams, really, like going to college one day, maybe studying something that could give her a better future. But those dreams often felt distant, like stars in the sky she could see but never reach. Still, she held on to them. Dreams were the only thing that kept her from feeling completely overwhelmed by life. That morning, the diner was quieter than usual. A few regulars sipped their coffee slowly, reading newspapers or chatting in low voices. Maria moved from table to table, clearing plates and refilling drinks. She smiled at everyone, offered small words of encouragement, and made sure every customer felt welcome. Even when her back ached and her feet were sore, she never let it show. There was pride in her work, and she loved the little moments that made it worthwhile: a grateful smile, a friendly word, a thank you from someone who noticed her effort. Maria's favorite part of the day was often her short breaks. She would sit in the small staff room, a cup of coffee in hand, and allow herself a few moments of rest. Sometimes she would eat a small sandwich she had packed, other times just nibble on an apple. It was quiet there, away from the clatter of dishes and the chatter of customers. These moments reminded her that she was human, that she deserved care just as much as she gave it to others. That morning, as she unwrapped a simple ham sandwich, she thought about Alex. He had a big science project due, and she had promised herself she would help him after her shift. She wished she could afford better food, new clothes for school, or even a small treat now and then. Life felt heavy sometimes, but Maria never let herself sink. She believed that even in difficult times, small acts of kindness and hard work could make a difference. As she prepared to take a bite of her sandwich, the bell above the diner's door jingled. Maria looked up and saw a small girl standing there, shivering slightly in the cold morning air. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. Her hair was messy, and her coat looked a little too big, but her eyes were wide and curious. She hesitated near the entrance, glancing at the few customers scattered around the diner. Maria's heart immediately went out to her. The little girl didn't say anything. She just stared, her small hands clutching the strap of a worn backpack. Maria noticed that she seemed hungry, the way she looked at the food on the tables. Her own sandwich felt heavy in her hands, but in that moment, she knew what she had to do. She pushed it gently toward the girl. "You can have this," Maria said softly. "Don't worry about paying me back. Just eat, okay?" The girl's eyes widened, and she looked around as if to make sure Maria was serious. Then, tentatively, she stepped forward and took the sandwich. Maria watched as the girl bit into it, relief and gratitude shining on her small face. It was a simple gesture, but for Maria, it felt like the most important thing she had done all day. As the girl ate, Maria returned to her work, moving with the same grace and patience she always did. Inside, her heart felt a little lighter. Sometimes, she thought, life gave you these small moments to remind you why kindness mattered. Even if her own life was hard, even if she struggled every day, she could still make a difference for someone else. That morning, as the little girl finished her sandwich and smiled shyly at Maria, something unspoken passed between them. It was more than just food, it was care, concern, and a quiet acknowledgement that someone was looking out for her. Maria didn't know it yet, but this small act of generosity would soon change her life in ways she could never imagine. As she wiped down tables and refilled coffee cups, Maria felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't entirely harsh. Maybe there were moments of magic hidden in the simplest acts of kindness. And maybe, if she kept giving, kept caring, she would find that life had a way of returning goodness to those who needed it most. Even though her own struggles weren't over, Maria felt something shift inside her. There was pride, yes, but also anticipation. Something was about to happen, she didn't know what, but she had a feeling it would be extraordinary. And for the first time that morning, as she served another customer with a smile, she felt the faintest spark of excitement that life could be more than survival, it could be a story worth telling. The little bell above the diner door jingled again, and Maria looked up from the counter. She expected another regular customer coming in for a cup of coffee, but instead, she saw the same little girl still standing there near the corner booth. It surprised her because most children who came with their families would run straight to their seats or follow their parents closely. But this little girl was different, quiet, hesitant, almost as if she didn't quite belong there. Her small hands clutched the straps of her backpack as though she was holding onto it for comfort. She had already finished the sandwich Maria had given her, and now she sat silently, swinging her legs beneath the chair. Maria noticed how carefully the child had eaten each bite, as if she wanted to make it last. Something about her delicate, thoughtful movements tugged at Maria's heart. Maria grabbed a clean glass and filled it with water, then walked over. "Here you go," she said kindly, placing the glass in front of the girl. "You must be thirsty." The girl looked up with wide brown eyes. She didn't speak right away, but she gave a tiny nod. Her fingers wrapped around the glass, and she sipped slowly, almost politely, as though she didn't want to cause trouble. Maria crouched down so that she was at eye level. "What's your name, sweetie?" she asked gently. The little girl hesitated, then answered softly, "Emily." Maria smiled. "That's a beautiful name." "My name's Maria. Do you live around here?" Emily shrugged. "Not really, my daddy brings me sometimes, but I don't come inside." That answer caught Maria's attention. She wondered what the child meant. Not wanting to push too hard, she nodded with understanding. "Well, I'm glad you came in today. You can always stop by if you're hungry." "Okay." Emily gave a small smile. Her face brightened for just a second, and Maria felt her heart warm. There was something about the little girl, something fragile yet full of quiet strength that made Maria want to protect her. As Maria stood up, one of the older customers at a nearby table whispered, "That little one looks hungry." "Poor thing." Maria didn't respond, but she knew the customer was right. She could see it in the way Emily's eyes followed plates of food that were being carried to other tables. The hunger wasn't just in her stomach, it was in her expression, her movements, her silence. Maria returned to the counter, thinking. She didn't have much money to spare. Her own lunch had already gone to Emily. But something inside her told her she couldn't just leave it at that. So, during a quiet moment, she quickly put together a small plate of few fries, half a grilled cheese sandwich, and a cookie she had saved for herself. Carrying it carefully, she placed it in front of Emily. "Here you go. Something extra for you," she said warmly. Emily's eyes widened. "Really? For me?" "Yes," Maria nodded. "For you. Don't worry, it's on the house." Emily bit her lip, hesitating. "Daddy says not to take things without paying." Maria's heart melted. She knelt again and looked Emily straight in the eye. "It's okay, Emily. This isn't stealing. Sometimes people give things because they care. And today, I care." The little girl studied Maria's face for a long moment, as though trying to decide if she could trust her. Finally, she picked up a fry, dipped it in ketchup, and smiled a real smile this time, bright and innocent. Maria stayed nearby, watching as Emily ate happily. For the first time since she'd walked in, the child looked relaxed. She even hummed softly under her breath as she munched on the cookie. The sight made Maria's chest ache with both joy and sadness. Joy, because she had brought a smile to the girl's face. Sadness, because she wondered what kind of life this child had, that a simple plate of fries could bring her so much happiness. A co-worker, Lisa, leaned over and whispered, "You've got a soft heart, Maria. If the manager sees you giving away food again, you might get in trouble." Maria glanced at Emily and then back at Lisa. "I'll take the risk. Some things are more important than rules." The truth was, Maria didn't know why she felt so strongly about this little girl. Maybe because Emily reminded her of Alex, her younger brother. There had been nights when Alex had gone to bed hungry, and Maria had lied, saying she wasn't hungry just so he could eat. She knew that look of quiet hunger in a child's eyes. It was something she never wanted to see again, not in her brother, and certainly not in this little stranger sitting in the booth. As Emily finished her meal, she carefully wiped her mouth with the napkin, then whispered, "Thank you." Her voice was small but sincere. Maria smiled back. "Anytime, sweetheart." For a moment, the diner seemed quieter, softer. The sound of clinking dishes and murmured conversations faded into the background. Maria felt a strange peace, as though something significant had just happened. She didn't understand it yet, but she knew that meeting Emily wasn't just a random moment. It felt important, almost like the universe had guided the child into the diner at that exact time. But Maria also noticed something else. Emily kept glancing toward the window, as if she were waiting for someone. Every time a car passed by outside, her eyes followed it. Maria thought perhaps her father was nearby, maybe running an errand or parking the car. Still, there was a shadow of worry in Emily's eyes, as though she wasn't completely sure if he would return. Maria wanted to ask more, but she didn't want to make Emily uncomfortable. So instead, she sat with her for a few minutes, talking about little things. Emily told her she liked drawing, especially animals. She said she had a stuffed rabbit named Daisy, and that she always carried her in her backpack when she went places. She even unzipped the bag and proudly showed Maria the small, worn-out toy rabbit with floppy ears. Maria laughed softly. "Daisy looks very loved." Emily nodded seriously. "She goes everywhere with me. She makes me feel safe." There was innocence in the way Emily spoke, but Maria could sense that behind it was a story she didn't yet know. Why was the girl alone? Why did she seem so unsure about simple kindness? And why did she act as if she was used to waiting? Maria didn't have the answers, but she knew one thing for sure: she wanted Emily to feel safe, at least for the time she was there. As Emily leaned back in the booth, happily full, Maria returned to her duties. She couldn't stop herself from glancing at the child now and then. Each time, Emily smiled at her, a quiet connection passing between them. It was the kind of connection that didn't need words. Maria had no idea that at that very moment, Emily's father was nearby, searching for her. She didn't know that the kindness she had just shown would soon come back to her in ways she could never have dreamed of. For now, all she knew was that a little girl had walked into her life, hungry and alone, and she had done what her heart told her to do: feed her, care for her, and remind her that there was still kindness in the world. And though Maria didn't realize it, this single act was about to set off a chain of events that would change everything: her job, her struggles, her dreams, and even her future. Maria had just finished pouring coffee for one of the regulars when the bell over the diner door jingled again. She didn't look up immediately, since she was balancing a tray in her hands, but she sensed a sudden change in the atmosphere. The door had opened quickly, and the footsteps that followed were hurried and heavy, unlike the relaxed pace of most customers. When she finally glanced toward the entrance, she saw a tall man in a dark suit rushing in. His eyes swept across the diner, scanning every table with a mixture of panic and urgency. He looked completely out of place in the small diner: his polished shoes, his expensive-looking coat, the watch glinting on his wrist. He wasn't the kind of person who usually wandered into this part of town, let alone into a modest little diner. Maria's first instinct was to feel protective. She noticed how his sharp eyes softened instantly when they landed on Emily, who was still sitting in the corner booth, holding her stuffed rabbit close. The little girl's face lit up the moment she saw him. "Daddy!" she exclaimed, sliding out of the booth. Relief washed over the man's face. He strode quickly across the room, knelt down, and wrapped his arms around Emily. For a moment, the diner went quiet, as though everyone could sense the tenderness of the reunion. Emily held onto him tightly, burying her face into his shoulder. Maria stood nearby, watching with gentle curiosity. She hadn't known what to expect: perhaps a worried parent, perhaps someone careless who had left their child alone. But the way the man held Emily showed love, concern, and a deep sense of care. "I was so worried," the man said softly, though Maria could still hear the emotion in his voice. "Don't ever wander off like that again, sweetheart." Emily looked up at him, her small voice full of honesty. "I wasn't scared, Daddy. A nice lady gave me food." She pointed toward Maria. The man turned his head, his gaze landing on her. His eyes were striking: dark, thoughtful, and sharp all at once. For a second, Maria felt nervous under his stare, not because he looked angry, but because he seemed to be measuring her somehow, trying to understand her without words. Maria smiled kindly, brushing off the attention. "She was just a little hungry," she said simply. "I had a sandwich, and I thought she could use it more than me." The man stood, adjusting his coat, but his eyes never left Maria. He looked at her with something she couldn't quite read: part gratitude, part curiosity. "Thank you," he said at last. His voice was calm but carried weight, the kind of voice that made people stop and listen. Most people wouldn't have done that. Maria shook her head lightly. "Anyone would have, sir. She's just a child." He seemed to want to say more, but Emily tugged on his sleeve, holding up the toy rabbit. "Daddy, look. She likes Daisy too." The man's stern face softened again, and he chuckled quietly. "I see that." He then looked back at Maria, his eyes lingering for a moment longer. "Still, I appreciate what you did." With that, he lifted Emily into his arms. She leaned against his shoulder, her eyes sleepy now that her hunger was gone and her father was back. He carried her toward the door, and Maria returned to her work, wiping down a table that didn't need wiping just to occupy her hands. But something about the exchange stayed with her. There had been something unusual in the way he looked at her. Not just a polite thank you, not just the relief of a father who found his daughter, but something deeper, like he had been truly moved. The diner soon returned to its usual rhythm, the sound of silverware clinking, the low hum of conversation, the faint hiss of the kitchen grill. Maria served plates, refilled drinks, and smiled at customers, but her mind kept drifting back to the little girl and her father. Who was he? What kind of life did they live? And why did she feel as though their paths had crossed for a reason? Later that afternoon, as the lunch crowd slowed, Maria finally had a moment to herself. She sat in the small staff room, sipping water. Lisa walked in, raising an eyebrow. So, what was that about earlier? That man who came rushing in? He looked like he stepped out of a magazine. Maria chuckled softly. That was Emily's father. She wandered in here hungry, so I gave her my sandwich. He came looking for her. Lisa smirked. Well, from the way he looked at you, I wouldn't be surprised if he comes back. Rich guy, fancy suit, clearly not from around here. Did you notice his watch? That thing could probably pay our rent for a year. Maria rolled her eyes, though she couldn't help but smile. I don't notice things like that. He was just a worried father. Maybe, Lisa said with a teasing grin. But men like that don't usually say thank you to waitresses like us. Trust me, there was more to it. Maria shook her head, but Lisa's words lingered in her mind. She didn't want to admit it, but there had been something unusual about him. Not his clothes, not his wealth, not even the way he carried himself, but the look in his eyes when he thanked her. It was as if he had seen something in her that most people overlooked. As her shift came to an end, Maria gathered her things and prepared to head home. The memory of Emily's smile and her father's gaze stayed with her, though she tried not to think too much about it. Life for Maria was simple: work, home, taking care of Alex, and repeating it all the next day. She didn't allow herself to daydream about strangers who lived in a different world. But what Maria didn't know was that the stranger hadn't forgotten her either. When the man had walked out of the diner carrying his daughter, he had glanced back once, just before the door closed. He had seen Maria wiping a table with quiet determination, her face kind but tired, her posture showing both strength and weariness. Something about her generosity, her selflessness, and her lack of expectation had struck him deeply. For most of his life, he had been surrounded by people who wanted something from him: money, connections, or favors. Rarely did he meet someone who gave without asking anything in return. And here, in a small diner, a young waitress had given his daughter her own meal, not knowing who he was, not caring about appearances. It was a moment he couldn't forget. That night, as Maria walked the familiar streets back to her apartment, she carried with her a quiet sense of peace. She didn't know why, but she felt that meeting Emily had mattered somehow. She had no idea that this simple act of kindness was the beginning of a story that would change everything: her struggles, her future, and perhaps even her heart. The next day at the diner began like any other. The morning sun filtered through the large glass windows, painting golden patterns on the checkered floor. Maria tied her apron carefully and tucked a pencil behind her ear. She had learned to prepare herself for long shifts. It was always better to be ready for whatever the day might bring. She didn't expect anything unusual. In her mind, the incident with Emily had already settled into a warm memory, one she carried quietly in her heart. She hadn't thought she would see the little girl again, nor her father. Life, she assumed, had moved on, as it always did. But just as the clock ticked past 9, the familiar sound of the diner bell jingled, and Maria looked up. There, standing at the entrance, was the man in the dark suit, the same man who had rushed in yesterday looking for Emily. This time, however, he wasn't rushing. He stepped inside calmly, his coat draped neatly over his arm, and his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Maria. Her breath caught for a second, though she quickly composed herself. Customers came and went every day. She couldn't afford to let one man make her nervous. Still, there was something commanding about his presence. Even without trying, he drew attention. Several customers glanced his way, clearly noting the difference between his polished appearance and the simple atmosphere of the diner. Maria walked over with her usual polite smile. "Good morning. Table for one?" "Yes," he replied with a nod, his voice steady and smooth. He followed her to a booth by the window. After handing him a menu, Maria stood ready with her notepad. "Can I get you something to drink?" "Just coffee, please." "Black," he said. Then, as Maria turned to leave, he added, "Miss, you're the one who helped my daughter yesterday, aren't you?" Maria paused and looked back at him. His eyes were fixed on her, not in the cold way strangers sometimes stare, but with genuine interest. She gave a small nod. "Yes. Emily is a sweet girl. I just did what anyone would do." He leaned back slightly, studying her as if trying to understand her better. "Not everyone would have done what you did. Most people would have ignored her, or even told her to leave. But you didn't." Maria felt a little embarrassed. Compliments always made her uneasy, especially when she didn't feel she had done anything extraordinary. She was hungry. "I couldn't just sit there and watch. That's all." The man's lips curved into a faint smile. "That's exactly what makes it important. You acted without expecting anything." There was a pause as Maria placed his coffee on the table. "Your daughter, she's okay, right?" she asked, her voice soft. He nodded. "She's fine. She wouldn't stop talking about you last night. She told me how kind you were, how you liked her toy rabbit, and how you gave her food without hesitation. You made quite an impression on her." Maria smiled, her heart warming at the thought. "I'm glad she's well. She's a lovely child." The man stirred his coffee, though he didn't add anything to it. After a moment, he said, "My name is Richard Hale." Maria blinked. The name sounded faintly familiar, though she couldn't place it immediately. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Hale. I'm Maria." He gave a small nod. "Maria. A beautiful name. And fitting, I think." She tilted her head slightly. "Fitting?" Richard's gaze was steady. "Because you have a generous spirit. It's rare." Maria felt her cheeks grow warm. She wasn't used to such words, especially not from someone like him. To distract herself, she asked, "So, what brings you back here today?" "Just the coffee." Richard chuckled softly. "Not exactly. I wanted to see you." That answer startled her. She glanced around quickly, as though expecting her co-workers to overhear. "Me?" "Yes," he said simply. "Yesterday, you showed kindness to my daughter without knowing anything about us. I believe actions like that should never go unnoticed." Maria shook her head, trying to brush it off. "Please, sir, I don't need recognition. I was just doing what felt right." "That's exactly why I came back," Richard replied. "I want to offer you an opportunity." Maria frowned slightly, confused. "An opportunity?" Richard leaned forward, his expression serious but kind. "I'm starting a new community project. It's designed to help people, single parents, families struggling with bills, young people who want an education but can't afford it. I've been looking for people to join me, people who have integrity and compassion. And yesterday, I realized that you are exactly the kind of person I need." Maria's heart skipped. She looked at him with wide eyes, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "Me? But I'm just a waitress." Richard shook his head. "No, Maria. You're not just anything. What you did yesterday tells me more about your character than a resume ever could. I've met many people who are skilled, but very few who are truly kind. That matters more than anything in the work I want to do." Maria's mind raced. She thought of Alex, of their tiny apartment, of the long nights worrying about bills. She thought of her dreams she had tucked away because life had left no space for them. Could this be real? Or was it just a moment of kindness being stretched into something bigger than it really was? She swallowed hard. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Richard replied gently. Come and meet with me tomorrow. I'll explain everything. You'll see for yourself. Maria hesitated. Part of her wanted to refuse opportunities like this never came her way, and she didn't trust that life could change so suddenly. But another part of her, the part that still held on to dreams despite the hardships, whispered that maybe this was meant to happen. Finally, she said softly, I'll think about it. Richard smiled, satisfied with her answer. That's all I ask. Before leaving, he placed a business card on the table. It was simple but elegant, with his name, a phone number, and the logo of his company printed in neat letters. Maria picked it up carefully, as if it were fragile. As Richard stood, he added, Maria, sometimes life tests us in small ways before giving us bigger opportunities. Yesterday, you passed a test you didn't even know you were taking. Think about that. With that, he left the diner, the bell jingling softly behind him. Maria stood there, staring at the card in her hand. Her heart beat faster than usual, her thoughts tangled in disbelief. Could this really be happening? Could her simple act of giving away a sandwich lead to something that might change her life? She didn't have the answers yet, but one thing was clear: her life had just taken an unexpected turn. And whether she was ready or not, the path ahead was no longer the same as it had been yesterday. That night, Maria could not sleep. She lay awake in her small bedroom, staring at the ceiling. The business card Richard Hale had given her rested on the nightstand, its sharp white edges catching the faint glow of the streetlight outside. She kept glancing at it, as though it might somehow answer the storm of questions in her mind. Could this really be real? She thought of the way Richard had spoken, his voice steady, his words certain. He had looked at her as if she mattered, as if her small act of kindness had been something extraordinary. Maria was not used to being noticed like that. Most days, she was invisible, just another waitress carrying plates and pouring coffee. But Richard had seen something different. Still, doubt lingered. Opportunities like this did not fall into her lap. Life had taught her to be careful, to expect disappointments. And yet, there was a tiny flame of hope burning inside her, one she could not put out no matter how much she tried. Early the next morning, Maria made breakfast for her younger brother, Alex. He sat at the kitchen table, swinging his legs while eating toast with jam. You're quiet today, he said, looking at her with curious eyes. Maria smiled faintly. Just thinking. About what? Alex asked. Maria hesitated. She didn't want to fill his head with dreams that might not come true. But she also didn't want to hide the possibility. Yesterday, I met someone who might be able to help us. Alex's eyes lit up. Really? Like how? Maria reached over and smoothed his hair. I don't know yet. But maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Later, after dropping Alex off at school, Maria found herself standing outside a tall glass building downtown. She had followed the address written on the business card. The building was modern, with shining windows and a polished lobby that felt worlds away from the diner's warm but worn-down interior. Her hands trembled slightly as she pushed open the door. She felt small in the grand lobby, surrounded by people in suits, people who looked like they belonged here. She wondered if she should turn back. But then she thought of Alex, of their tiny apartment, of the years she had worked herself to exhaustion just to survive. If there was even the smallest chance this meeting could change things, she had to take it. A receptionist greeted her kindly and directed her to the top floor. When the elevator doors opened, Richard was already waiting. He smiled when he saw her. Maria. I'm glad you came. She nodded, still feeling a little out of place. I wasn't sure, I know, he interrupted gently. But sometimes the hardest steps are the ones that lead us to where we belong. He led her into a spacious office with large windows overlooking the city. The view was breathtaking, but Maria barely noticed her focus was on Richard and the sincerity in his eyes. "Maria," he began, "yesterday I told you about my new community project. Let me explain. I grew up with very little. My family struggled, just like you are now. But someone gave me a chance. One person's kindness changed the course of my life. Ever since I found success, I've wanted to give that same chance to others. And now, I've built a program that does exactly that. We offer jobs, training, and scholarships to people who need them most. But more importantly, we bring in people who truly care, people who understand hardship and still choose kindness. That's why I thought of you." Maria listened, her heart racing. The words seemed too good to be true, and yet, something inside her told her it was genuine. "But why me?" she asked softly. "There must be so many people more qualified." Richard shook his head. "Qualifications can be taught. Skills can be trained. But kindness, true kindness, cannot be faked. You gave your own meal to a child you didn't know, expecting nothing in return. That is exactly the kind of heart I need in my team." Maria felt her eyes sting with unexpected tears. She quickly blinked them away, not wanting to seem weak. "I don't know if I deserve this," she whispered. Richard leaned forward. "Maria, you do deserve it. Sometimes the people who doubt themselves the most are the ones who deserve the most opportunities. Will you let me help you? Will you join us?" Her answer came not from her lips, but from the look in her eyes, a mixture of gratitude, disbelief, and a spark of hope that had been buried for too long. Finally, she nodded. "Yes. I'll try." Richard smiled warmly. "Good. That's all I ask." From that day forward, Maria's life began to change. She still worked at the diner for a short while, but soon Richard helped her transition into a position within his foundation. She started small, helping organize community events and assisting families in need. But as weeks turned into months, she grew in confidence. She found herself speaking with people, encouraging them, sharing her own story. Slowly, she realized that her struggles had given her something valuable: empathy. She could connect with people because she understood their pain. Her younger brother, Alex, was also touched by Richard's generosity. Richard arranged for a scholarship that covered Alex's schooling. For the first time, Maria didn't have to worry about how to buy his textbooks or pay for his supplies. The relief was overwhelming, but it was also freeing. She could finally dream without fear. Life did not suddenly become perfect. There were still challenges, still long days and moments of doubt. But there was also hope now, an opportunity. Maria no longer felt trapped in a cycle of survival. Instead, she was building something new, not just for herself, but for others too. One evening, as Maria walked home from her new job, she thought back to the day it had all started. A simple sandwich. A hungry little girl. A choice to give, even when she had so little herself. She realized then how powerful small acts of kindness could be. They seemed small in the moment, almost invisible, but they carried the power to change entire lives, including her own. Maria smiled to herself, lifting her face toward the sky. She didn't know what the future would bring, but she knew this: kindness would always lead the way. And no matter how far she went, she would never forget the lesson that had changed her life forever, that the smallest gestures of love could open doors to the biggest miracles. And as she thought of Emily, the little girl whose smile had started it all, Maria whispered a quiet thank you to the universe. Because sometimes, all it takes is a single moment, a single act, to turn an ordinary life into an extraordinary story.